I want to take the remaining time and go through a series of emails that have just become public. We've alluded to them, and go into a little more depth. The first email, which we've already alluded to, is from Michael Mann. Michael Mann is a climatologist at Penn State University. He's one of the leading scientists in the IPCC. He is the author of the original hockey stick theory that is kind of the genesis, the seminal document for the theory that man-made CO2 is the cause of the climate warming in the world. This is a document from him to Phil Jones, who is until recently the head of the climate research unit at East Anglia University in Great Britain. Now, Dr. Jones has resigned in the last week or so, but in it says, "Can you delete any emails that you've had with Keith?" Keith is Keith Briffia, B-R-I-F-F-A, regarding AR4. AR4 is a UN IPCC fourth assessment document from 2007. It's one of these policy documents that's used around the world. And you can see that he says, "I'm going to contact Gene about this." Okay, Gene is actually Eugene Wall, W-A-H-L. He's at the National Ocean and Atmospheric Administration's office in Boulder, Colorado. That's with the U.S. Department of Commerce. So I'm going to contact Gene about this. And then, "Can you delete any emails that you have?" I'll get Casper to do likewise. Casper is Casper Jones. He is, Castor Ammann, A-M-M-A-N-N. He's at the National Center for Atmospheric Research, or NCAR, in Boulder, Colorado. It's a federally supported consortium. So in this email, we have collaboration between NOAA, NCAR, both in the United States, the Climate Research Unit, CRU, in East Anglia, Great Britain, and many prominent IPCC contributors coordinating document destruction. I think that is something that policymakers here in the United States should be concerned about. Now let's go to the next document. Slide, email number 2. Now the first one was from Michael Mann to Phil Jones. This is from Phil Jones to a gentleman named Tom Wigley, and its subject is SCHLE, Schlee's Suggestion. This is last year, December of 2008. It says, "I am supposed to go through my emails, and he can get anything I've written about him. About 2 months ago, I deleted loads of emails, so we have very little, if anything, at all." So what this is showing is that they have, one could say they have conspired to delete data. Ben Santer, who is Santer 1, is a prominent climate modeler at the Department of Energy's Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, and Tom Wigley is a scientist at the National Center for Atmospheric Research in Boulder, Colorado. The gist of this is he's already deleted a lot of emails from 2 months ago. Now, what are they trying to hide here? Now let's go to email number 3. Email number 3 shows an unprecedented data purge at the CRU in East Anglia, Great Britain. Here is a public index of documents on one day, and then here is the public index on the next, very quickly after they've gone through and purged all of this. It says the next day, on July the 28th, Phil Jones deleted data from his public files, leaving online a variety of files from the 1990s. This morning, everything in Dr. Phil's directory had been removed. It's not just the emails that have been deleted. In a widely reported event, Steve McIntyre, who's a Canadian researcher who testified before Congress several years ago when I was chairman, and who has been attempting to get these data sets, to get these documents, he's been trying to get, through Freedom of Information Act, the documents that some of these studies are purported to be based upon. And instead of releasing them, they purged them. They took them away in what is reported to be an unprecedented data purge. They've deleted files pertaining to station data from the public directories. Why? Where are the data now, if they're still in existence? What is it they're trying to hide? If the temperature data records really prove their theory, they would want to publicize them. At least I would think that they would. Okay, let's go to number 4. This is an email from Phil Jones, who we know well now, to a gentleman named Neville Nichols. Mr. Nichols, see, Mr. Nichols, I'm not sure who Mr. Nichols is, but here it says, I hope I don't get a call from Congress. Okay? I'm hoping that no one there realizes I have a U.S. Department of Energy grant and have had this with Tom W. for the past 25 years. So this is back in 2005. This is when I was chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee, and we were conducting the investigation into Dr. Mann's hockey stick proposal, hockey stick theory, and we had asked for some documents from Professor Mann or Dr. Mann, and this gentleman is saying we hope the Congress doesn't realize that we're getting federal money. We don't want them to be asking us about documents. Of course, as we now know, they have destroyed many of those documents, or apparently have destroyed many of those documents. Okay, let's go to number 5. Now, this document shows that the links to which they'll go to suppress information. It says, if they ever hear that there is a Freedom of Information Act now in the UK, I think I'll delete these rather than send them to anyone. Now, Congressman Markey, who's a good friend of mine and is a believer, a proponent of man-made global warming, has got data sets that he says justify some of the policies that he supports. But here we see that some of these documents, some of these data sets that Mr. Markey and others who sincerely believe that there's a problem appear to be very suspect. In fact, they're so suspect that if they have to release them publicly, they would rather delete them than to comply with the Freedom of Information Act. Tom Wigley has sent me a worried email when he heard about it. He thought that people might ask him for his model code. My heavens. You know, keep in mind that this theory that mankind made CO2 emissions is driving the temperature upwards, it's just that. It's a theory. And these researchers have built these models to try to replicate the planet's temperature mechanism, and all these models show the temperature going up. But that's the conclusion that the modelers want. It is not factually correct to say the temperature is going up. It's factually correct to say the modelers who want to prove that the temperature is going up are putting variables and assumptions in these models that drive them up, but they apparently don't have the data to back that up. Let's go to number 6. This is again from Mr. Jones to a gentleman named Gavin Schmidt, concerning the revised version of something called the WinGen paper, WENGEN. It says, all of our Freedom of Information officers have been in discussions and are now using the same exceptions not to respond, the advice that they got from the Information Commissioner. The Freedom of Information line that we're using is that the IPCC, now keep in mind the IPCC is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, is funded primarily by the U.S. taxpayer, not exclusively, but primarily, is exempt from any country's freedom of information, because the skeptics have been told this. Even though we possibly hold relevant information that the IPCC is not part of our remit, i.e. mission statement, therefore we don't have an obligation to pass it on. But to me, that's just irresponsible to say that the IPCC, which is a total governmental agency, admittedly through the UNN and a large number of nations, but the U.S. is the primary funder, is above federal freedom of information laws, not only in the United States, but every other country. This information that's been collected and paid for by U.S. taxpayers and funded by U.S. scientists is now out of reach of the U.S. taxpayer. I think that's just flat wrong, Madam Speaker. And my last email is number 7. And this shows, while they accuse people like myself of trying to be bullies and to ostracize people, here's an email where, again, this Professor Mann, it's to Michael Mann from a gentleman named Malcolm Hughes. Just a heads up, apparently the contrarians now have an N with GRL. And GRL, which is the Geophysical Research Letters, which is a prominent climate journal. This guy, Saul Sayers, has a prior connection with the University of Virginia Department of Environmental Sciences that causes me some unease. And then later on, this is truly awful. If you think that Sayers is in the greenhouse skeptics camp, then if we can find documentary evidence of this, we could go through official AGU channels to get him ousted. They're trying to ostracize those that are honest enough to say that they have some doubts about the theory. And I'll end with this. The theory of global warming caused by mankind is just that. It is a theory. It is not a fact. As U.S. taxpayers and as the guardians of the U.S. taxpayers, we should demand that the facts be made public so that we can make a relevant policy decision. I thank the gentleman.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 6, 2009, the Chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Rohrabacher, for 60 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman, and let me agree with the distinguished ranking member that global warming is something other than what it's been presented. He said it's a theory. I would suggest that as we go on with my speech, you'll learn that it is a fraud. Madam Speaker, not too long ago, I stood here on the floor of the House and remarked that I half expected Rod Sterling to appear from behind a curtain and announce, "This is the Twilight Zone." Well, since then, this body has continued on an agenda fit only for the most bizarre episode of that program. In the last months, Congress has passed bailouts, rescues, and stimulus packages, dumping trillions of dollars of debt onto the backs of the American people, and yes, onto our children's backs and their children's backs. Congress passed a massively expensive and economically destructive cap and trade bill, moved toward a government takeover of our health care system, and now Congress appears ready to support President Obama's request to dig ourselves even deeper into the mire of Afghanistan. Optimism over the election of a new president promising change has turned into despair as the American people are realizing what kind of change is being imposed on our country. It's going from bad to worse. This week marks the beginning of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change in Copenhagen. It started yesterday, December 7th, Pearl Harbor Day. How very appropriate. President Obama and Democrat leaders of Congress are planning to attend. This conference could well bind the American people to a series of international agreements that will be a boon to globalist bureaucracy and, yes, their power elite allies, while at the same time picking the pockets of the American taxpayer and shackling us to restrictions, mandates, and controls inconsistent with our free society and enforced by governing bodies we've never voted for. According to the conference's website, the conference in Copenhagen is a turning point in the fight to prevent what they claim will be a climate disaster. And I quote, "The science demands it, the economics support it, the future generations require it," proclaims the website. Well, Madam Speaker, I am here to explain why that aggrandizing postulation is complete and utter nonsense, and to warn of the danger that lurks behind this high-sounding rhetoric. The Copenhagen Conference is the culmination of efforts that began in earnest back in 1992. That was the year our New World Order president, George H.W. Bush, submitted the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change to the Senate. It was quickly adopted by a voice vote. For the most part, that 1992 Framework Treaty was filled with grandiose yet vague principles. It asked for long-term CO2 reductions from the 192 nations which signed that contract, yet few of the obligations were spelled out, and there was no enforcement or penalties written into that treaty. It stated objectives, and that was step number one. Step number two came in 1997, when the Kyoto Protocol was established. When the protocol in Kyoto was established, that it included enforceable mandates that meet all of those stated objectives. Madam Chairman, if I could ask for a bit of consideration from the chair at this point, because there's a conversation going on up front that's distracting.
Be in order.
Madam
Gentleman may
Chairman,
proceed.
Madam Chairman, the conversation is still going on. You might, thank you, Madam Chairman. Step two came in 1997 when the Kyoto Protocol established enforceable mandates to meet those stated objectives that were started in the earlier network agreement that was sent on to the Senate by President Bush. Well, the 1997 protocol was different than the earlier one because it had enforceable mandates to meet the stated objectives that were stated earlier. This clearly would have meant a fundamental altering of our economy with a dramatic negative impact on the lives of our people. With the Republicans in control of the Senate at that time, President Clinton never submitted the Kyoto Treaty for ratification. Then, in 2001, President George W. Bush announced that we would not sign the Kyoto Treaty due to the enormous costs and economic dislocation associated with complying with the Kyoto mandates. And that was the end of what would have been step number two. So here we are at step number three. And while Kyoto-like agreement is not likely, Copenhagen may well lay the foundations for the future that the globalists who are pushing this agenda envision for us, what they envision for the United States, U.S., us. The threat to us is there, and it is real. A few months ago, H.R. 2454, the so-called cap and trade bill, passed the House and is now waiting action in the Senate. That far-reaching legislation seeks to put in place taxes and regulatory policies that exactly parallel what the Copenhagen crowd would mandate and can be traced back to that same alliance between our domestic radical environmentalists and a globalist elite. This unholy alliance has already had an impact. It is no accident that for over the past 20 years, America has built no hydroelectric dams, no nuclear power plants, no oil refineries, and has brought into production a pitifully small amount of new domestic oil and gas. In essence, our economy has been and is now being starved of traditional energy development. Even the much acclaimed solar energy alternative has been strangled in its cradle. The Federal Bureau of Land Management, which is unduly influenced by radical environmentalists, has prevented the building of solar power electric generating facilities in America's vast deserts. This supposedly to protect the habitat of lizards and insects, which are obviously more important to these elitist decision makers than the quality of life of human beings. Our quality of life, us. Again, the forces behind the undermining of America's domestic energy development know exactly what they're doing. treaty obligations or not. They want to change our way of life, to remake America, whether we like it or not. This isn't about green power. It's about raw political power exercised over our lives.